Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this awards reception. As you know, this evening we'll be presenting the two IPI-IMS awards. So we're going to get started with that. Thank you so much for being here. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, IPI members, distinguished guests. Welcome and thank you so much for being here this evening at Columbia University's beautiful Low Library as we honor courage, resilience, and innovation in journalism, and pay tribute to those who put everything on the line to defend our right to the news and to the truth. Before we proceed further, on behalf of IPI, and by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Scott Griffin. I'm IPI's Deputy Director. I'd like to extend a warm thank you to our host this evening, Columbia University President Lee Bollinger, himself a widely respected scholar of freedom of speech, a core right upon which journalism rests. I'd also like to thank our partners in our two awards, International Media Support, whose representative you'll also hear from this evening. And finally, another thank you to all the donors and supporters who have made this incredible Congress and this evening possible. Thank you so much. Tonight, as I mentioned, we are presenting two awards. The first is the IPI World Press Freedom Hero Award, which was first bestowed in the year 2000 on 50 legends of journalism, past and present, to mark IPI's 50th anniversary. Since then, the award has been given on an annual basis to journalists who have made significant contributions to the promotion of press freedom, particularly in the face of great personal risk. And our second award is the IPI-IMS Free Media Pioneer Award, which was launched in 1997. And the Free Media Pioneer Award is presented to organizations meeting the demands of the moment through innovative models of journalism, media, or press freedom defense. They're opening up new ways of thinking about the free flow of information to strengthen independent journalism and meet the needs of their communities. The IPI-IMS Awards are about more than just celebrating the work and achievements of our honorees. They're also about showing global solidarity and support to those who need it. Journalists who are working in some of the most difficult conditions we can imagine, under threat from war or from state repression. So with these awards, we're also saying, you're not alone. The world, we, are standing by you. Or in the case of the late Shireen Abu Akleh, you're not forgotten, and we will continue the fight for justice. So I want to thank all of you for being here this evening, for showing that solidarity with our awardees, and by extension with all journalists who are working on the front lines. They deserve our admiration and they deserve our support. And now, to introduce this year's World Press Freedom Hero Awards, it's my pleasure to invite to the stage Siddharth Varadarajan, Editor-in-Chief of the Indian news site The Wire, and a member of the international jury that selected this year's award recipients. Siddharth, thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you all for being here for this very important part of the Congress's work. An award given to journalists for the work that they have done, to defend media freedom, to defend the rights of their readers and viewers to know what's going on, may not necessarily protect the recipient from further repression or pressure. Indeed, in the case of some governments, an award of this kind may actually serve to further inflame and outrage those in power, to take revenge against journalists being recognized in this fashion for the work that they have done in speaking truth to power and confronting those governments. And yet, as a former recipient of an IPI award last year, the publication I edit, The Wire, received the Free Media Pioneer Award. And believe me, it's as an expression of solidarity, it's unbeatable. As an expression of the fact that your peers around the world, working in difficult conditions, find merit in the work that you do and choose to honor you, choose to say that we stand shoulder to shoulder with you, provides a great feeling. And this act of solidarity, which the award involves, certainly provides a psychological measure of protection for the recipient, even if states and governments are dismissive. So today, the Media Hero Awards that the IPI is giving goes to two outstanding individuals who are fully worthy of our solidarity. The first, Carlos Dada, a pioneer of investigative and digital journalism in his country, El Salvador, but also in the Central American and Latin American region. Carlos Dada is co-founder of and director of the website El Faro. Set up in 1988, the mandate they took for themselves was to create a media platform that was free of all political influence and would be able to fearlessly investigate whatever was happening in the country. Over the years, El Faro has broken big stories on human rights violations, on corruption, on the nexus between politicians and organized crime. Carlos Dada himself, apart from leading a wonderful team, was personally targeted along with 21 of his colleagues with Pegasus spyware. This was confirmed in a report by Citizen Lab earlier this year. And this targeting was the product of work that Dada and his colleagues at El Faro were doing on the links between the Salvadoran government of President Nayib Bukele and criminal organizations. And of course, you pay the price in terms of this kind of surveillance, this kind of spyware, which completely compromises your privacy and also is intended to disrupt the work that needs to be done. We will now see a short video about Carlos Dada and his work as the next stage in this award ceremony.
The more we have developed our, I would say, journalistic DNA at El Faro through investigations and narrative journalism, the consequences are harsher and harsher. We have been receiving threats and harassment maybe for the last 15 years, but I believe it was never as intense as it is today, because the threats and the harassment come from a small group in power that have dismantled our democracy and make it into an authoritarian regime. They don't shy away from letting everybody know they are ready to use all the institutions of our system to go against their critics. When we made public that we were infected with Pegasus, what what this also has consequences on our sources, and sources are vital to do the kind of journalism that we do. But now our sources are also afraid that the regime knows that they are talking to us. So we have lost a lot of sources, and we are now in the need to develop new ways of communicating with sources so they can feel safe talking to us. We have never faced so much risk and danger as presently coming from this regime. I am very humbled, particularly by the fact that I am receiving this award along with Shireen Abu Akleh, who of course was killed earlier this year, and she is a martyr of journalism. Shireen's fate is what none of us would ever want. That's the ultimate sacrifice. No one gets into journalism to make that sacrifice. No one wants to get killed. I feel very humbled to receive this award next to her, and I'm very grateful because this helps to shed light in the situation of journalism in Central America. We are working more and more under harsh conditions, under threats of imprisonment or even death. So I'm very grateful. This will help to shed light on what's happening in my part of the world. Perhaps the most important thing is that it sends a clear message to the people that want to harm us, that maybe the price to harm us just gets higher because there are people around the world looking at us and looking at the persons who want to attack us for doing just our jobs.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a matter of great regret that a courageous, outstanding journalist and exemplar of our profession like Carlos Dada was unable to get a visa to attend this event. And he will join us now to make brief remarks via a video link.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you, board members and jury of the International Press Institute and the International Media Support for this great honor. Indeed, I wanted to be there with you. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a visa on time to travel to New York. I'm especially grateful, and I believe I speak for all my colleagues in Mexico and Central America, for the statement you made public today, expressing your concerns about the situation for journalists in the region. International and public support is a key protection for us. As I said in that video, it is very special for me to share this award with the late Shireen Abu Akleh, a reporter from my generation with a solid career of excellence that spanned for decades. She was killed by an Israeli soldier in the Jenin refugee camp, and later her funeral was interrupted by a raid against the mourners ordered and executed by Israeli authorities. Her death remains unpunished. To her family, my solidarity and support. Shireen is a true martyr of journalism, waiting for justice. We know that journalism is one of the riskiest professions, but we can't just talk about risk in journalism as if we were talking about racing cars or climbing the Everest. No, Shireen's death was not an accident, and neither were the killings of Jamal Khashoggi, of Javier Valdez, of Daphne Caruana, of Angel Gaona, of Miroslava Breach, of Dom Phillips, of the more than 2,000 journalists killed since 1992. Every one of them paid the ultimate price for informing other human beings, for speaking truth to power, for denouncing corruption, for walking into organized crime territory or investigating injustices against underprivileged people, crimes against the environment, against humanity. Most of those deaths remain unpunished. I come from Latin America, where around 40% of those deaths have taken place. Only in Mexico, a journalist is killed every 15 days. And now, after a mere 3 decades of erratic democratic life, authoritarianism is back in Central America, and with it, attacks on the press. Authoritarian populists love monologues and can't stand alternative versions of their narrative. They can't allow the truth to surface. I am the third Central American to receive this award. The first, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, was murdered half a century ago by the Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua. The second is José Rubén Zamora, the brave founder of Guatemala's El Periódico, who was arrested a few weeks ago, accused of money laundering. He remains in prison as I speak, and I join those who strongly demand his freedom. It seems to be the fate of heroes in journalism, to be killed, imprisoned, or exiled. I'm not a hero. I don't even want to be a hero. In fact, I don't know any journalist who wants to be one. We should work without threats, without surveillance, without harassment, without fatal consequences. We shouldn't be mourning colleagues, denouncing unjust imprisonments, or leaving behind our roots. We need to point to those responsible and demand that they be punished. No journalist should be forced to make heroic decisions to do the job. And still, the pressure increases every day. In Nicaragua, the Ortega regime has closed 54 news outlets, imprisoned 11 media workers, and forced into exile almost 200 journalists and editors, many of them accused of money laundering. In Guatemala, besides José Rubén Zamora, a dozen reporters and editors have also been accused or imprisoned. Others have chosen exile to avoid it. In my country, El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele controls the executive and the legislative branches, and through a coup, he now also controls the Supreme Court, all the tribunals of the country and the prosecutor's office. He has made the army and the police his personal guards. Just in the last 4 months, he has incarcerated more than 50,000 people without a detention order, accusing them without proof of links with gangs. He declared war on his critics and has been very successful silencing most of those voices. But journalism remains a big obstacle to their strategic monologue. So it was not surprising when, on an address to the nation broadcasted by all TV stations, he showed my picture and accused me of money laundering. He has publicly led defamation campaigns against many other colleagues, and some have already opted for exile or a career change. Last year, with the expertise of the organizations Access Now and Citizen Lab, we found that the phones of 22 members of El Faro had been infected with the Israeli software Pegasus. The operators tapped my smartphone during 167 days. They activated at will my camera, microphone, geolocation. They had access to all my chats, videos, photos. They operated almost a whole year into the phone of Carlos Martinez, a colleague at El Faro. Besides the personal burden of knowing that people who mean harm to us have the pictures and addresses of our dear ones, it also has had tremendous professional consequences. As soon as we made it public, we lost a significant amount of sources. Nobody wanted to talk to us anymore for fear of suffering retaliations from a government that controls all the institutions. The regime has followed us physically, threatened us in various ways, sent drones to our homes, one of them even entering my apartment through the window. We have 6 ongoing investigations against us, 4 of them related to tax and money laundering, and at least 2 criminal investigations. Congress has passed laws that criminalize journalism and previews sentences of 15 years for any journalist or publisher that quotes gang members or publishes gang symbols. In the 25 years that El Faro has been publishing, we have never faced such threats. And I'm certain that this situation will only worsen since we keep reporting and investigating. In a way, they have been successful by making us a story and pushing us to invest many resources in defending ourselves, thus depriving us of some vital capacities to investigate power. We are aware of that. The world we want to be part of needs an independent press that speaks truth to power and puts its methods at the service of truth and better understanding why we live the way we live as societies and countries. But it is more and more difficult to renovate our faith in journalism. It is a very frustrating practice. We want things to change for better with the speed and high impact of the Watergate scandal, but that seldom happens. Yesterday, in this same conference, Dmitry Muratov was declaring the death of independent journalism in Russia. His country is worse now than when Novaya Gazeta started publishing. We're not far away. El Faro was the first Salvadorian media born in democracy. Now, democracy is almost completely gone. And yet, thanks to an innovative, modern, and greased propaganda machine, Mr. Bukele is the Latin American president with the highest popular support, which of course raises a paradox. The communities we serve are not supporting us. Two questions follow naturally. First, does journalism change anything? This may sound too self-complacent, but I believe that in many places, as bad as things are, things would be worse if it weren't for the work of good journalists. And second question, why do we do what we do? This is a serious question to ask in the middle of the crisis a lot of our colleagues are going through all around the world. But we need to defend our reasons for doing journalism. And that means each one of us needs to look deep inside and around and find those reasons. We all have the right to decide not to do journalism anymore, since the price for doing it is getting higher. It may actually be the same and healthy decision to make. But if you decide to go on, you must know that silence is not an option. Our word is our power, our contribution to our communities, and also our fate. And we must use our word to break the monologues of power. We cannot renounce to the search of truth through a method of verification and the use of language to communicate our findings and stimulate public debate. We must use our words against silence. We must use our words to defend the truth. Again, thank you very much for this tremendous honor, which I accept on behalf of all my colleagues in Central America, who are every day on the verge of heroism to keep practicing journalism. It shouldn't be that way. On behalf of them, thank you for your support.
Thank you very much, Carlos Dada, for your powerful and moving acceptance speech. I would now like to invite Nelson Rauda onto the stage to accept the physical award on Carlos's behalf. Friends and colleagues, the second recipient of our Media Hero Award for this year is Shireen Abu Akleh. For 25 years, Her gutsy reporting from the front lines of occupied Palestine for Al Jazeera became a primary source of news and information for people not just in the region but around the world. Inspired by her courage, her talent and skill as a reporter, her ability to be at the right spot or the difficult spot where the story took her, inspired many Palestinian and Arab women to enter journalism. Sadly, on May the 11th, 2022, Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by Israeli sniper fire. I should add that over the last couple of decades, at least 18 other journalists have been killed by the Israeli forces simply for doing their job. The International Press Institute hopes that this award, recognizing Shireen Abu Akleh's courage and fortitude and tragically her sacrifice, will catalyze the demand and the movement for justice, the demand for a proper, objective, independent inquiry that will fix responsibility on those who targeted and took her life and ensures that they are punished. Unless that happens, we will have to keep raising our voice and keep demanding that her life, work, and sacrifice are not forgotten. This demand for justice is absolutely paramount. We will now see a short video about Shireen Abu Akleh's work.
وانضمت إلى فريق الجزيرة في الربع الأخير من العام الأول من عمر الجزيرة الزميلة شيرين أبو عاقلة، مراسلة ثانية من القدس.
شو بدك انت؟ ناخذ صوت الطخ منك
ولكن إذا تم تنفيذ هذا المخطط لا ينقل أي جيد في مدينة القدس مما يبرز من شيء.
شيرين أبو عاقلة، الجزيرة، الأراضي الفلسطينية.
سلامات. هلا كيف حالك؟
للأسف يعني في بعض الأحيان يعني أينما وضعت الكاميرا دائما أنت محط اتهام. التغطيات كثيرة، يعني نحن مرينا من الأيام اللي أنت مضطر فيها تبات في المكتب، بتنا في مستشفيات، في السيارات. كانت ظروف صعبة جدا، ولكن كنت بتشعر إنه أنت قادر تحقق شيء، قادر توصل صوت هناك.
القدس الغربية، رام الله المحتلة،
من مدينة عسقلان،
جنوب رام الله،
القاهرة، نيويورك،
من حاجز قلنديا شمال القدس المحتلة،
من تجمع حمصة،
من أراضي قرية ميعار،
من حاجز بيت حنون،
واشنطن، لندن،
قرب سجن عوفر، غرب رام الله،
من مدينة ريتشموند، فيرجينيا،
من قرية شوشحلة، بيت لحم،
من قرية بلعين،
من قرية لاسافر،
جنوب الخليل،
من قرية دير الجير، خيم الأمعري، من بلدة العيسوية،
من منطقة الأغوار،
من بلدة سيلة الحارثية،
من حي الشيخ جراح، جنين.
جاهد! شيرين يا عم شيرين! اسعاف!
استشهاد الزميلة شيرين أبو عاقلة برصاص الجيش الإسرائيلي أثناء تغطيتها لاقتحام مدينة جنين في الضفة الغربية بعد استهدافها من قبل قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي برصاصة في الرأس.
في اللحظات الصعبة تغلبت على الخوف. فقد اخترت الصحافة كي أكون قريبة من الإنسان. ليس سهلاً ربما أن أغير الواقع، لكنني على الأقل كنت قادرة على إيصال ذلك الصوت إلى العالم. أنا شيرين أبو عقلة.
The assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh remains a terrible crime committed by the Israeli military, and there is a poignancy to this award being given today here. Shireen Abu Akleh was a Palestinian American, and let this award serve as a reminder to the people of the United States and above all the government that the quest for justice has to be taken up by them. This is not something that can be just left to the journalistic fraternity. This is a responsibility of the US government to ensure that justice in this case is done. I would like to invite Shireen Abu Akleh's niece, Lina Abu Akleh, to accept the award on her behalf and to make a few remarks by way of acceptance. Lina?
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you to the International Press Institute and the International Media Support for honoring Shireen's legacy with the World Press Freedom Hero Award alongside Carlos Dada. Most of you know Shireen as an exceptional journalist and a voice of truth. I know her as my aunt, my best friend, my role model, and my source of inspiration. From her, I learned how to be empathetic and compassionate, as she was the epitome of both. Shireen empowered countless young Arab Palestinian girls and women to pursue careers in journalism. Since she was one of the first Arab female field reporters, honoring Shireen with this prestigious award is a recognition of her professional work that will set an example for future generations of journalists. Shireen should have been here to receive this herself, but unfortunately, one bullet to the head from an Israeli sniper took my aunt away from us in the moment, in the sudden moment and in a heartbreaking way. Shireen was killed twice, once in Jenin on May 11th, and the second time in Jerusalem, May 13th, when her funeral was brutally attacked, and mourners and my family were beaten by Israeli police. It has been 4 months since Shireen was killed, but no official action has been taken so far to hold her killer accountable. Our family has not had the time to grieve, as we've had to shoulder the task of demanding justice and an independent investigation from the US administration, a role that should have been taken up by the US the moment one of their own citizens was killed while reporting. But we will continue to call for justice and accountability, and we continue to rely on organizations like yours and all journalists to join our efforts in seeking justice for Shireen. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina, for those words. To introduce the IPI-IMS Free Media Pioneer Award, I'd like to invite Morten Østervang from International Media Support to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Scott. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here tonight. I first of all want to thank IPI for partnering with IMS on this important prizes. I also want to thank Columbia University for hosting us in these absolutely beautiful and historical monumental buildings. It's really a privilege. IMS, as some of you will know, has worked for over 20 years supporting media in conflict and countries affected by political transition. Unfortunately, we have to say that work hasn't become less important today. This year's award, it will come as no surprise to any of you, I think, will go to Ukrainian independent media, which we've all met in these days. It goes to 7 independent media outlets that immediately in the face of war rose to the challenges and danger brought about by Russia's war of aggression with courage, quality reporting, and a steadfast commitment to serving local communities. The IPI-IMS International Awards Jury chose to honor the creativity and bravery of Ukraine's independent media and wished to recognize the ways in which Ukrainian media were able to quickly respond to their communities' needs and the realities of war. They offer a model of resilience and courage that has inspired the whole world. These outlets strive to provide much-needed high-quality journalism while at the same time combating pro-Kremlin propaganda, struggling with insufficient resources and risking their lives on the front lines. Each of these 7 publications play a unique role in bringing news and information to the public, and together they perform, with their different roles and perspectives and audiences, an invaluable service in informing their communities. They are Ukrainska Pravda, which is one of the largest online dailies in Ukraine. Has a long history of its renowned, independent, and high-quality journalism. Number 2, the Kiev Independent, which in a matter of hours, weeks, and days stood up to the challenge and became the leading English language news outlet in Ukraine and an essential source of information for readers around the globe on what was going on in Ukraine. Third one is ABO, launched in responding to the urgent needs of the population. It created a new platform called evacuation.city to give local audience necessary practical information about aid, social payments, and accommodation in Ukraine and abroad. Absolutely essential. Fourth one is Hromadske. I hope I pronounced that rightly. A digital broadcasting station that became the go-to media for young Ukrainians in particular, providing an independent, critical alternative to oligarch-dominated media. Fifth one, slitsvo.info. Known also prior to the war as a small investigative news outlet, which does very, very in-depth reporting focusing on stories of corruption and crime committed also by Ukrainian public officials, and at times facing retaliation from the authorities. But in spite of the struggles, it kept going on throughout the war, publishing extremely detailed reports on the atrocities and the war. And then we have Stop Fake. Established in 2014 to fight Russian propaganda and disinformation, It is now working to verify information and refuting Kremlin propaganda, which has been crucial not only to Ukrainians, but also to the world. Then we have, and I hope, again, my pronunciation is appropriate, Ukraina. An innovative media project providing high-quality journalism in several languages, including coverage of multiculturalism and marginalized group. It introduces Ukrainians of different origin, societal status, geography, and gender in the form of creative storytelling, including videos and photography. Now, the award, of course, goes to all of these institutions, but we also know that behind every institution, there are people. People with an immense sense of duty, of courage, of commitment, many of whom are here tonight. They report in a time where their own families are struggling even to survive. Their country is in an existential battle to survive. And reporters, as we heard Olga tell us yesterday, are being called traitors for telling the truth, even about their own government. Before inviting the award winners to the stage, I'd like to welcome you to watch a movie or a film about.
Personally, I was really scared on the morning of the 24th. I've texted somebody saying I've never been this scared in my entire life. But it is good that we are journalists in a way that it gives us purpose. So our mission in that moment, and it remains our mission, was to tell the world what's going on. It is so important now because our victory depends also on what the world sees from Ukraine.
My first thought and my first fear was only one. Will my country exist after this brutal invasion, and will my nation exist after this brutal invasion? And as a journalist, as editor-in-chief of Ukrainska Pravda, I understood that we have to focus on every single aspect of this war. We have to focus on Russian war crimes, we have to focus on sanctions against Russian oligarchs, we have to focus on military operations and news from front lines. A lot of aspects of this war.
I remember taking our equipment from the office on February and not knowledge if I would ever return here. I was afraid to imagine that we would have to take the editorial office abroad and leave Ukraine, and I didn't understand how we would do our work in such conditions. But thanks to the Ukrainian armed forces, this didn't happen, and our team left Kyiv only for 1 month, and in April we returned, and now we are recording this video in our office in the Ukrainian capital.
Було страшно. Ми до останнього не вірили, що війна почнеться. І, якщо чесно, команда не мала чіткого плану, а що робити далі. Але ми швидко зорієнтувалися. Багато людей з нашої команди жили на сході України. Більшість виїхали в перші ж дні. Інших довелося вмовляти трохи довше. І це зрозуміло, тому що полишити власний рідний дім дуже важко, навіть якщо над ним літають ракети.
We had our editorial call in the early morning of the first day of the war, and we were talking what as investigative journalists we can do, what we can produce as journalists. And of course, I didn't know if we will exist as media, if we will work, if our work will be useful for the war times. So we were talking for a long time, and we decided that the war is a big crime, and we have a lot of things to do as investigators.
Then, of course, there were rumors that Russians are going to be targeting journalists or some, public people with targeted assassinations, even outside of Kyiv.
We divided our team into parts. One worked from western part of country and one worked from Kyiv, because it was on security issues. We understood that probably if we will work from one place, it will be dangerous, and Russia can attack us, and we can be vulnerable.
Of course, the main threat is physical, because during every trip to the east or south of country, there is a risk of being killed or injured. And every day I worry about journalists working on the front lines.
З початку березня на сході і півдні України закрилося понад 100 медіа. Ми пишаємося тим, що нам вдавалося увесь цей час підтримувати щоденну роботу тих сайтів, які знаходилися в тимчасово окупованих містах і в містах на лінії фронту. Їхні команди в безпеці, хоча деяких журналістів росіяни забирали, кілька днів тримали у в'язницях, допитували і намагалися схилити до співпраці. Але не вдалося, і ми були певні у наших людях.
People were, I think we were probably even more affected not by the threat to our personal safety, but the threat to the safety of our families, because most of our families stayed in Ukraine, and some of the people had families in the places that were targeted and that were threatened. We had somebody who had family in Bucha, somebody who had family in northern Ukraine, in a city that was surrounded by Russians. And yes, the fact that the team was able to continue working throughout this, knowing that you know, they were able to keep writing and posting, publishing news about the attacks of the very same places where their most dear people were at the same time. I mean, it shows, I think, the incredible strengths that people find in themselves that they didn't know existed before they find themselves in circumstances like this.
We try to spend times with families, we try to not think about work, on the other hand, we try to talk to each other and understand problems of each other. I try to understand problems of my reporters, but it's a war, it's big stress, every day, every minute stress. And we just should keep it and accept it and just live with that.
You face with strategies every single day. You face with grief every single day, but at the same time you have a big hope that it will help our country to exist. It will help our country to become really independent.
Of course, we are setting ourselves up for a long struggle, and I have a feeling that the war will be with us for a long time.
I really don't know how the situation will evolve in the near future. I think I'm done with making predictions. What I think I can say for sure is what is not going to happen, and that is Ukrainians are not going to want to surrender. They're not going to seek compromises. No matter what happens, no matter what Russia does to Ukraine and Ukrainians, I don't see it in the people around me. I don't see any space for a compromise or surrender of any way.
It's an honor to please welcome on the stage Ukrainska Pravda Editor-in-Chief Sept Musayeva. Kyiv Independence Editor-in-Chief Olga Rudenko and CEO Darina Shevchenko. Slitsvo, on behalf of Slitsvo, Editor-in-Chief Anna Babinets. On behalf of Hromadske, former Executive Director Julia Fedivsa. And finally, Stop Fake's editor Irina Chalupa. Sure. And now I'd like to invite Darina to say a few words.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the award. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at the IMS staff retreat, and people were asking me a question. What does this public recognition of your work mean to you at this time? And I said it then, and I will say it now. It is an honor to be recognized in the circle of our colleagues. But it's more than that. It is also another chance for us as Ukrainians to make Ukraine's voice heard. We are now watching live as war fatigue is settling in, and the world is getting tired of the horror pictures coming from Ukraine. And, you know, people just want to enjoy their Aperol somewhere in Manhattan and, you know, torn limbs and bloody faces, and dead children are definitely in the way of that. It's human nature. But for us, it's also a matter of life and death, of our life and death. We, as Ukrainian media, will be reporting on what's happening in Ukraine no matter what. But it also seems like it's no longer enough to invest all the resources in the news coverage. You have to be creative. You have to be, you know, on Netflix or even on OnlyFans to make sure that people hear you. But there is just, you know, so much that you can do to make the war entertaining. But for us, it's not a choice. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that the world's attention is on Ukraine. And today, we want to ask of you to keep talking about Ukraine. Ukrainian media is a fire force, and, you know, I'm honored to be representing this group of people and, you know, many more Ukrainian journalists who are back home doing the important work. But it has not always been like that. Ukraine wasn't granted a democracy. It wasn't some, you know, gray-haired man sitting on the cloud after the Soviet Union collapsing, like, Ukraine will get a democracy now. It was a very difficult story. It was a struggle. We protested every authoritarian law imposed. We had 3 revolutions. We lost lives. We never made peace with our colleagues being murdered. And it brought us to changes. We managed to build the democracy. 15 or 20 years ago, when most of us were starting our careers in media, there were maybe 5 Ukrainian independent media in the country, and 2 of them were BBC Ukraine and Radio Liberty. And look at us now. It's a very different story. And look at Russia. They made concessions, they complied, and largely that led to the tragedy that you are all watching now. Ukraine will never give up. We will keep fighting, but our victory will come at a much higher price if the world just turns away. So at this moment, we want to ask you all to stand with Ukraine, to keep talking about Ukraine, but more than that, we want you to do something else. For years, you've invested in Moscow bureaus, and that created a habit of looking at Ukraine and the region through the Russian lens. But that has to stop now. That is our job to help that stop, but it's also yours as journalists. Yesterday's story of praising Gorbachev for 15 minutes and looking at the pictures of dictator is just another example of that. Gorbachev supported the annexation of Crimea and the start of war. For us, Ukrainians, this is, almost offensive. But this is a result of Russian false narratives and Russian propaganda that's been going on for decades and decades. And on behalf of all my colleagues, I want to ask you to make yet another step and make an effort to try and look at our region and at Ukraine through the Ukrainian lens. I don't know if that's a big ask or a small one, but I do believe that together we can do it. And that will change the history, and that will help Ukraine win, and that will help the democracies around the world bring this world to peace finally. We thank you very much for this award. It's a great recognition, and we do hope that together we can do a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darina, for those remarks. And I'll just end by thanking all of you once again. Thank you for thank you for your solidarity with Ukraine's media. Thank you for your solidarity with Carlos Dada and other journalists in Central America who are facing repression. And thank you for standing with us to demand justice for Shireen Abu Akleh and to stand with her family as they seek that justice. Thank you again, all of you, for being here. We invite you to stay for the reception, and we hope to see you tomorrow for the 3rd and final day of the IPI World Congress. And I think you all agree it's been a fantastic event so far. We'll see you again tomorrow at 9:30 at the Journalism School. Good evening. Thank you.